Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Thanks for sticking with me. This is part 12 of the Theodore Robert Bundy series. If you haven't watched parts 1 through 11, this is the time to hit that pause button and then we'll be right here. And a disclaimer that these are true crime videos and are not made for children. Does contain sensitive subject matter, so viewer discretion is advised. Where we left off in the last episode, on December 29th, 1977, Ted escaped from a Colorado jail and he made his way to Florida. One author noted by the time he got to Florida, he was not the refined killer of 1974 or 1975, this handsome young man who would draw women to him like a magnet. In Florida, he was repelling them. They're telling the police later, this guy was creepy. His eyes were weird. It was like a repulsion coming from him. By January 7th, 1978, he was at Florida State University, and that's in Leon County, Tallahassee, Florida. He moved into the Oak Apartments, which was an old Victorian-style home. It was a converted two-story house on West College Avenue, and he signed a lease there. At the Oak, Ted was a decade older than most of his new housemates, and he presented himself as Chris, a well-tailored loner. So basically, he kept to himself for the most part, and people assumed he was a graduate student, but he was 100% supporting himself by stealing. He had no job. He had no income. Ted rented apartment 12 at the Oak, and he was seen drinking heavily. Note that the rooms there had no kitchens, and the tenants shared a bathroom at the end of the hall. Bundy went jogging every evening, probably to peep also, and he started stealing credit cards, and he also enjoyed eating at Chez Pierre on them. For example, Ted treated a female roommate to a $37 steak dinner, that's $37 in 1978 dollars, with champagne at the restaurant, and a waitress remembered a man, quote, with a cold air about him, end quote, eating expensive meals and good wines. Authorities would later discover he would go a day or two without eating, and then he would eat like a horse from restaurant to restaurant, which I guess makes sense because he didn't have a kitchen at the Oak. On January 10th, 1978, Ted was stealing like it was his full-time job. He broke into a 1971 Toyota parked at Pennsylvania Street, and he stole a TV, Sony radio, and a typewriter, and he took the items back to the Oak. On January 11th, he broke into a Mustang and stole a notebook. Through January and February, he stole credit cards from shopping malls, the Stroger Library, and Sherrod's. That was the bar, the disco bar right next to Chi Omega. On January 13th, he stole a car tag from Tallahassee. And on January 14th, 1978, Ted was at the Sherrod's disco bar. He was creeping out the students. One waitress there at Sherrod's remembered him because he was overly polite to her. And then it's Super Bowl Sunday. Chi Omega House is a sorority located at 661 West Jefferson Street. I took this picture of the Chi Omega House from Captain Borax's YouTube channel. I recommend you check it out if you haven't. Ted would later go on to describe the Chi Omega murders as, quote, an extreme aberration, end quote. After being locked up and then on the run, he had no way again to be respectable, and so he just went ahead and went on a binge. Ted will later tell Joe Alloy he was window peeping the night of Chi Omega. The Chi Omega sorority house was among the fraternity houses and right next door to the disco bar Sherrod's. 40 girls usually lived at Chi Omega. At 9:30 p.m., Lisa Levy and two Chi Omega sisters went to Sherrod's, and at 10:30 p.m., Ted was seen at Sherrod's by Connie Hastings, scanning the girls, dressed in dark clothing, and staring coldly at her. Ted later danced with her friend, who was also creeped out, and he gave many female patrons an unnerving stare that night. He was seen outside later, sitting on a bench. Lisa Levy went back to the sorority by 11:30, and she went to sleep by 1:30 a.m. Sophisticated and stylish Margaret Bowman, she wanted to be a museum curator, and she'd gone on a date, and she was back at the house at approximately 2 a.m., and it's thought that Bundy entered around 2:30 a.m. At 3 a.m., Carol Johnson came home and found the sliding glass door open and the upstairs light off. After 3 a.m., Nita Neary arrived home and found the door unlocked. She heard a thump upstairs and heard running in the upstairs hallway. A white man came down the stairs with a 3-foot club in his hand. The club was a piece of firewood from outside the house. He was wearing a dark knit cap, light-colored pants, and a dark pea coat. She thought he was approximately 5'8", 150 pounds with a straight nose and thin lips. She saw his profile and she made this sketch. Ted later theorized to Hugh Ainsworth that the killer entered the sorority house via the back door that was stuck open. Lisa Levy had been murdered first. She was the only girl who was SA'd. If you watch YouTube, you know what I mean by that. She was found on her stomach in cardiac arrest with extensive injuries to her female parts. She had been bitten multiple times on her gluteus maximus. Then Karen Chandler had been beaten with the bat. And then Kathy Kleiner had also been assaulted with the bat. Kathy Kleiner was found cross-legged on her bed with blood pouring from her mouth. She later told 9 News Australia that she'd been studying for a test and that they had parallel twin beds in their room. They were 6 feet away from each other, so she was 6 feet away from her roommate, and she fell asleep and she heard a door open and the sound of someone stumbling, and she saw the silhouette of a person with a log, or she didn't know it was a log then, but she found out later it was the log. And then she was immediately hit in the head, and her roommate moved and he turned and struck her roommate, and she said the curtains were not closed. The windows faced the parking lot, and when they find out now that when Nita Neary was dropped off, the car lights lit up their bedroom, and this spooked Ted and he ran. The last victim was Margaret Bowman. She'd been strangled with a pair of nylon pantyhose, and she also suffered crushing blows to her skull. All the girls had been bludgeoned in their sleep. Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy did not survive the attack. Lisa Levy died on the way to the hospital, so this is Margaret on the medical examiner gurney. Kathy Kleiner and Karen Chandler both lived, but with severe injuries. Note that the sorority house, Chi Omega, was less than a mile from where Bundy was residing at the Oak. The police were called to Chi Omega at 3:23, and they arrived 3 minutes later. They arrived there by 3:26 a.m. The FBI's Bill Hagemeyer later said that Ted admitted that while emergency personnel were all around Chi Omega, that Ted was in the crowd drinking a beer. In my opinion, I don't know if that's true, because I know that Ted was heading towards attacking Cheryl Thomas next, so I don't know if he got his jollies watching the drama and then immediately went to Cheryl's house. Hagemeyer thought that Ted had peeped at Cheryl Thomas the previous evening before Chi Omega, though. So 90 minutes later, it's 4:15 a.m. Cheryl Ann Thomas, age 22, was a dance student who lived off campus in a tin-roofed duplex apartment 6 blocks away. That night, she ate a peanut butter and honey open-faced sandwich and she went to bed. And her neighbors, Debbie and Nancy, heard thumps coming through the shared wall of their apartments, and they eventually decided to check on their neighbor after hearing moans. Cheryl Thomas had been beaten severely with a board thought to be the same piece of wood that he got from Chi Omega. So Ted had pushed a chair under her front door. Cheryl could not remember the attack, thankfully. She survived with a broken jaw and a severed nerve in her ear. At 4:40 a.m., the police received the call to her residence, and surely they realized that these attacks were related. Once the news of these attacks hit the papers and the press, reporters and police in Colorado and Utah shuddered with recognition, with the familiarity of the stories. And they thought they knew who it probably was. Back at the Oak, Ted was home by 5 a.m. And the murders were all anyone wanted to talk about that day and next day, and Ted just couldn't keep himself from talking about it. And he said it was likely that the killer had done it before, and that it was smart that he'd use a weapon that could not be traced. Bundy's former attorney Leidner suspected his old client. He recalled, quote, But then when the killings in Florida took place, we were out to dinner with some people and I said, you know what? I bet Ted Bundy's in Florida. It just smelled of him. End quote. January 12th, Ted steals an FSU van's keys and he has a copy made and he returns the keys to the car. He also stole a license plate from a different vehicle. And he went to Publix and he stole a lady's purse. And at this point, like I said earlier, he's surviving on stolen credit cards. He was using one person's credit card. I think it's Labati's. It was his wife's card. He used it at Uncle John's Pancake House in Tallahassee. He was staying at the Holiday Inn from the 23rd to the 28th. I'm not really sure why he took up residence at the Holiday Inn. I don't know if he just needed to get away from the Oak or what. He was buying clothes on these stolen credit cards. He liked socks. He had a foot fetish, so he just bought tons of socks on the credit card. By February 1st, he went back to Sherrod's. He went back to Sherrod's right next to Chi Omega, and he stole a credit card. On February 4th, it's believed that Ted left room 12 at the Oak. He exited via the fire escape, and he wiped down the entire room, including the ceiling. Ted steals the FSU media van and he placed the stolen license plate on the van. Ted then drove east towards Jacksonville and he stayed at his favorite Holiday Inn. During this run, he stayed at multiple Holiday Inns. It also shows that the card was used at the Hilton, so I'm assuming that that night he stayed at the Hilton. I mean, the police went back and looked at everything, all the receipts, what he bought, where he was. And on the 5th, listen, he's buying things like shoes and socks, books on sailing, bike accessories, and a pipe. He needed to buy a book on how not to be a murderous sociopath. Ted was branching out. By February 8th, he was buying gas and a Jacksonville road map. And in Jacksonville, he went to the Green Acre sporting goods stores and he purchased a buck knife, which was never recovered. The price tag was recovered from the FSU van. And he paid cash for the knife, so he didn't use a stolen credit card for that purchase. I think the reason he was going to Lake City and Jacksonville and stuff like that was to try to keep doing what he was doing and not be caught. In other words, go back to his home base at the Oak and go off and do things elsewhere. On February 8th, in Jacksonville, a man resembling Ted tried to pick up Leslie Parmenter, age 14, in a parking lot near Jeb Stewart Junior High School. Ted was trolling around the junior high school. At 1:30 p.m., he approached the victim. He pulled up and started talking to her and said his name was Richard Burton from the fire department. And her steelworker brother rolled up in his truck to pick up his sister, and he was like, "What the blank are you doing with my sister?" And of course it spooked Bundy, and the brother accosted Ted, and Ted rabbited, he bolted, he jumped in the pickup truck, and they tried to chase down Ted's van. They noted the license plate tag, but Ted got away. A sketch artist was put on the case. So keep in mind, Ted has now been chased, and he's frustrated. So he leaves Jacksonville, and he goes back to Lake City, and he checks into the Holiday Inn, and the Lake City Junior High is minutes away from this Holiday Inn. Coincidentally, on February 9th, the FBI has finally put Ted Bundy on its 10 most wanted fugitive list, calling him a suspect in the slaying of 36 women. Quote, Bundy should be considered armed, dangerous, and an escape risk, end quote. So it's February 9th, 1978. Ted's driving the white stolen van from FSU. He's been put on the FBI's most wanted. He probably does not know this. And Kimberly Diane Leach is the final victim in what could be called the disorganized phase of his crimes. Kim Leach was from Lake City, and she went to the Lake City Junior High. Lake City is midway between Jacksonville and Tallahassee, and it was a rainy day. This is information from the court file. Kim was in a good mood because she'd been elected to the Valentine Queen Court. After gym class in the auditorium, she had to go back to get her purse from another part of the building, the math homeroom. And the girl who found the purse got a pass to go get Kim to get her purse. I don't understand why they just didn't take the purse to her, but it's neither here nor there. Kim returned to the math room, got her purse, left the room, and vanished. Ted's white van had been lurking near the campus. A school crossing guard saw a man in a white van eyeballing students from 7:30 a.m. to 8:20 a.m. That day, around 8:55, paramedics drove by and saw a man later ID'd as Bundy leading Kim by the arms. It was off Duval Street. They saw a white van in the middle of the road and they took notice of it, and they just assumed that the man was related to the girl. So the fire department lieutenant, they were driving home after 3 shifts. They were dead tired and they just wanted to go home and shower. And so nothing was reported. Ted killed Kim in the van, and she died from a neck wound from homicidal violence, probably with the buck knife. There was a blood stain in the van, which was covered with dirt, and folks wondered why she was dropped in a hog shed. Well, Bob Deckel said he had the answer to that there was an all-truck stop for inspection on the way that Ted was driving after her murder. And that once Ted saw that, he knew that he would have to stop the van for an agricultural inspection and that he had a body inside. See, all the vans are supposed to stop for it. So Ted was not going to stop, and so he took the first paved right turn, and then he must have just wandered along a dirt road. And that he surmised that Ted took advantage of Kim one last time, dropped her in the old hog pen. There were no hogs in it. Later, once they tied Ted Bundy to the stolen FSU van, they used the van's evidence in order to find the body. So 1970 CSI worked here. The soil samples taken from the van led them to Suwannee State Park, and the authorities found her body there. The body was partially mummified and partially skeletonized, and she'd been on her hands and knees, lying on her side in a hog shed, nude but for her turtleneck sweater pulled up around her head. This is so horrible, I know. There was a giant blood stain on the front of her turtleneck sweater, and later her blood type was also found on the van's carpet, and semen and blood type on her panties. The shoe impressions in the soil next to the hog shed seemingly matched Ted's. We'll address in the trial section, upcoming episode, the trial for Chi Omega, the trial for Kim Leach. We'll address the evidence in those episodes, but I just wanted to say the authorities had what was left in the hog shed, what was left in the van, the blood on the carpet, the fibers, receipts, and also what was found in an orange RV. Okay, so that'll be some circumstantial evidence they'll have against Ted in the case of the murder of Kim Leach. Ted then ditched the van. He kept the license plate. He stole an orange VW, and he went back to the Oaks. He'd been waiting for Ken Meisner's birth certificate to arrive so he could fully take over his identity. But he didn't just get the birth certificate and leave. On the 10th, he took a date. He had a date. Bundy took a girl out to Chez Pierre. On February 11th, Ted was back at the boarding house, and a neighbor, Don Ramsey, loaned him the February 11th issue of The Democrat, wherein the article had an FBI psychological profile of the Chi Omega killer. And that profile speculated that the Chi Omega killer was still in Tallahassee. And at this point, Bundy owed a month and a half rent at the Oak, and Ted still dawdled around. Eventually, Ted will be driving a stolen orange VW Bug. He'll park on Eglins Air Force Base, and he'll end up getting his vehicle stuck. He will get arrested, and we will have him off the streets. In the final episodes of this series, we'll be talking about his last arrest, the Chi Omega trial, the Kim Leach trial, and his execution. So, if you found this informative, please hit the like button and subscribe to be notified of the next videos. And without further ado, have an excellent day. Bye.